Good morning. My name is Eric Lambert. I was a chaplain in the United States Army. I'm retired now. I've been doing a study on the temple that has taken over 10 years. The beginning of my research actually was from Dr. Ernest Martin. Dr. Ernest Martin did a lot of archaeology down on the bottom side of the Temple Mount. This is to orient you to the map. This is the wall around the temple platform, the traditional temple platform. This is the Dome of the Rock right here. Al-Aqsa Mosque is down here on the southern tip of the platform. And these are the walls of the Turkish city that used to be thought of as the old city of the Jews, but it was not. Actually, down here is the old city of David. They've discovered that recently, and the Turkish walls are really something that came much later. There is a problem that we found as we researched this. Dr. Martin brought it up, and I've run his research a little bit further. A problem on what happened to the temple. Why is the wall still up? Why are the stones still one on top of another? The problem is this. Jesus predicted that there would be no one stone upon another when the Romans were finished with the city. They would totally level the city. But we see original stones all the way around the Temple Mount, the traditional Temple Mount, and that is a little bit of a problem. It is not a problem that just belongs to Christians. It's also a Jewish problem. In the Old Testament, Asaph in the book of the Psalms, Asaph is a priest, and Asaph's appointed by David to sing in the temple and to prophesy in the temple. And he prophesies the destruction of Jerusalem 2 times. The first time sounds a lot like the Babylonians, 586 BC. The Babylonians destroy the city and the sanctuary, and off they go into exile. And they stay there for a long time, 70 years or so. The second time Asaph predicts the destruction of the temple is the time of the Romans. And the Romans come and they do exactly what Asaph said. Asaph said they're going to turn this place to rubble. So it's a Jewish problem too to see these stones one on top of another and not turned into rubble. It's a Jewish and it's a Christian problem. Now there are other problems with this that we've discovered that have to do with this being the Temple Mount. The first one is in the 1970s, the Arabs had to dig some water pipes into the mount itself, and they dug a trench about 1 meter deep out from the Dome of the Rock. They were putting in water pipes for their ceremonies in their dome. An archaeologist went to watch, a Jewish Israeli guy went to watch and said he was very shocked, very surprised there was no destruction layer there. He fully expected as they dug down that meter deep that they would find a destruction layer, a burned layer, chips of rock and all the rest, and he was deeply chagrined that that wasn't true. And he said on all 3 other sides of the dome, that is also not true. There's no debris layer, there is no debris, no destruction layer there. So that's a problem. We also have a problem at the dome of the Mishnah saying that the ark rested on a 3-finger high stone. The problem with this stone under the mount, under the dome here, is that it is 5 feet higher off the platform than it should be. It's not 3-fingered high. The Mishnah says it must be, but it's not. So it doesn't fit the temple. Also, around the walls, Josephus, 1st century historian, 1st century priest, said, as he recorded the war between the Jews and the Romans, he said that these stones around the temple should be 60 feet long. Now, if you go on a tour, if you go down to Jerusalem, you go down to this area right here and walk down to a underground tunnel the Jews built about 20 years ago, that you find a singular stone that's 42 feet long. It's very impressive, it's very big, but it's not 60 feet. So it's not only not 60 feet by 12 feet, but it's a single stone. All the stones around here are not that big. There are other large stones, bigger than what we might do as Americans or anyone else might do, but Josephus says they were 60 feet long, and there's none like that around the Temple Mount. So that's an archaeological problem. Also in the southern area down here, R.W. Hamilton wrote a book, very rare book, 1949 rather, where he says they did some digging. They were trying to restore the Al-Aqsa Mosque that's here. It had some damage. They had to do some extensive work on it. And the Brits were there to record what happened and the trenches and the footers that were dug. What they didn't find is any evidence of Jewish building on this side of the mount. Now, it should be there because Herod put columns that 3 men had to stretch around, that size columns. He put 162 columns that big on this side of the mount, and it was called the Royal Stoa. So it's very spectacular, and people say if you haven't seen the temple that Herod built, you haven't seen beauty yet. So there should be something left along this side of the Temple Mount, but there's nothing there. So as they dug down and they did their footers and the Brits recorded everything, drew pictures, they should have found very large plinths, which are the resting place for columns. They found nothing of the sort there. Now, I'm sure Hamilton was aware that Clermont-Ganneau, several decades before this, commented that there was nothing here of those columns, and that he was surprised. So Hamilton, not trying to grind an axe or anything like that, he's just recording what they found. He has drawings, he has pictures in his book. It's a very rare book, but it says there's nothing there from the time of the Jews. And I quote, "Amongst these early remains, there is a notable absence of all traces of monumental building of the Jewish period." So we have no 60-foot stones. We don't have the right height for the rock under the dome of the rock. And there's also another thing. It's kind of a little bit hard to get to after a while, but if you really research it, you find that Pilate's house was right here. It was a meeting place. It was called a house by the pilgrims. It probably wasn't his house, but it was a meeting place where he could look down on the plaza down here and retreat into his fort. This would be the center of the fort, like all Roman forts have. And Pilate's house would be here. And he said, that is, an ancient writer said, Theodosius says, 100 Roman paces from there is Caiaphas's house. 100 Roman paces is the sheep pool that we read about in John chapter 5. So interestingly, they found a big palatial palace here that looks like it belonged to the high priest. And down here where the pool was, which we'll talk about later, Elatmazar, a famous archaeologist, has used Theodosius to identify many of the places down here south of the mount. So it's pretty interesting. So we have Pilate's house. Now, would Pilate's house be out in the suburbs? One map, ancient map, shows his house out here, but that turns out to be the priestly neighborhood of Jerusalem. So I doubt very much that Pilate had a house out here. Now, in my research, everything moves. Once you think you know where something is, somebody else says it's somewhere else. So they moved Pilate's house to the north side of the Temple Mount. So we have 3 locations for it, but the best one is here, and he could retreat right into the central part of his fort. This is the Roman fort. This is not the Temple Mount. Also, there was an aqueduct that ran under Pilate's so-called house. This aqueduct was built by funds from the temple. He actually stole money from the temple to build the aqueduct. Now, if you go to Jerusalem today, they will tell you, look how wonderful Pilate was. He brought water through this aqueduct into the Temple Mount for our religious ceremonies. But that's not true. Roman forts need 200 to 300 cubic meters of water a day. So I really think he stole the funds. And by the way, the Jews 2,000 years ago were very angry with him. They were not his friends. He didn't like them. They didn't like him. And he killed people willy-nilly. So I doubt very seriously he was interested in bringing water in for the temple services like they say today. 2,000 years ago, they despised him for doing this. So I have a suspicion that he brought in water into his fort. Now we also have some interesting testimony from Josephus, the first century priest, first century recorder of the war between the Jews and the Romans. He says that in the southeast corner of the Roman fort was a very high tower. Now that's what he says. 333 AD, the Bordeaux pilgrim stands on the south side of the mount, and he looks up and he sees a very high tower, but he thought this was the Temple Mount. So he says it's the pinnacle of the temple. But I think he's observing what he could see in 333 AD is the very high tower that belonged to the Roman fort. There's something else that was discovered that most people don't know about. There's a secret tunnel that was found just under the single gate right down here. It goes up in under the mount and it goes down south of the mount as well. And it's made of Herodian ashlars. We have a picture of that. And what we see is, in that picture, is the stones are the same kind of stones as go around the mount itself. Now, Josephus says that Herod built a secret tunnel to go from the fort down to the temple. So since everyone thinks the temple is up here, or excuse me, the fort is up here, they're looking for a tunnel up here. And when this was found in 1867 by Captain Warren of the Royal Engineers, nobody thought that this was what Herod was talking about. But it's made with Herodian ashlars. It looks exactly like what he talks about. And it would be facing down here to where we put the temple south of the mount. So we have the high tower, we have the secret tunnel, and we also have something else that Josephus talked about. Josephus says that there were gangways that went up into the fort, and the Romans would come down those gangways and go down to the temple. Well, it turns out behind the double gate and behind the triple gate, there are gangways that start at this level. When you go as a tourist, you'll be standing down here, right steps behind you, standing at the foot of the wall, and those ramps go up into the higher level of the fort, or of the Temple Mount itself. And so I believe those are actually the gangways that Josephus was talking about. Unfortunately, the word gangways was translated stairs. That's not a good Greek word for stairs. It is the word for gangways, and so it fits exactly. So we've been thrown off a little bit by translations, and so we have the two gangways right here. Josephus goes on to say that from those gangways there was colonnades that came down from the gangways down to surround the temple. If you follow the double gate gangway and then down to the colonnades, you hit this corner right here, and you might not be able to see it on this map, but there is a corner of the roads right here, and it hits what we say would be the west wall of the temple. And then the other colonnade would come down and hit the north wall of the temple, exactly like Josephus said. So we're looking at pointers that actually point you right to where the temple was. So we have the gangways, we have the secret tunnel, we have the high tower, we have an indicator that we're pointing in the right direction down here to find the actual temple location. Now the Jews, or rather, excuse me, the Israeli Antiquities Authority, back in 2015, found the Acra, not the Roman fort, but the Greek fort Acra from the Maccabee days. When they were invaded by the Greeks took over the city, and they had a fort right here. The problem is, Josephus said that fort was abutted right up against the temple itself. And he says it overlooked the temple because there used to be a high promontory that came up out of the ground, big jut of rock that came up, and you could climb up there and look down into the temple and observe the sacrifices going on. So it seems that they have proven that the temple has to be here if the Acra is really here. So the archaeology was ongoing when I walked by in 2015, and I said, I wonder what this is all about. And then later that year in December, they announced they had found the Acra. Now I looked at my old books, and right here used to be a parking lot, the Javadi parking lot. Somebody donated it, and so they started digging. It's a huge pit in the ground right now. And today you can walk by and they give a tour of it, and they talk about the Acra. What's interesting is several decades before they found it, there was a Bargil Pixner who told an archaeologist that up the hill from that location, now he doesn't know anything about it back in those decades before, but he says up the hill was a huge cistern, rock carved cistern under the ground there that had the word Acra carved on the side. And so what I suspect is that the water for the Acra, for this fort, this Greek fort, came from that cistern and was funneled down to where the Greek soldiers were. So the Greek fort Acra is supposed to be exactly right next to the temple and overlooking it. That promontory, as I said, was carved down over 3 years. It was destroyed by the Maccabees and the Hasmoneans. They got rid of it and leveled it down, so it's not there today. But Josephus gives that as evidence of where the temple really was. There's a sidebar to this problem, and I hope you don't mind just running through this with me a little bit, but it helps us establish something about the walls of Nehemiah. Up here on the north part of the temple is a church, St. Anne's, and by St. Anne's is a big pool. And everybody has said, by tradition for a long time, that that pool is where Jesus healed the paralytic. And so in John chapter 5, he describes the pool and Jesus coming there and healing the man and sending him on his way. That pool was examined back in 1903 by Sanday and Waterhouse, and they went there looking for the exact place where this pool was and where Jesus would have done this mighty miracle. And they examined 3 different locations, including St. Anne's. What they said was, this is too deep for sheep. It's a very deep pool. Sheep are extremely afraid of water. So you can't take them in there and wash them before taking them down for sacrifices. That's what Sanday and Waterhouse said, and we've known this for over 100 years, but somehow it doesn't reach our consciousness. We have a picture of this as well, of the model of St. Anne's with the very deep pools. It's an accurate model. The model happens to be down here in St. Peter's. There's a big church right down here, but the model is of the whole city, and they have a model of St. Anne's, and it does accurately show that these are very deep pools. Now we have a second problem with St. Anne's and the pools up here at St. Anne's, and it comes from Josephus once again. Josephus says that the Romans came from up here on Mount Scopus in the northeast corner, and Titus had his headquarters there, and he decided to move it down very close to the city. So he had his engineers level everything down to the Serpent's Pool. Josephus calls this the Serpent's Pool. The serpent is a symbol of Asclepius, the pagan god of healing. The Romans were into that. They didn't mind that at all. And I have a suspicion that this deep pool here was for the Roman soldiers to heal their aches and pains and to worship at the ruin, or they have ruins now, of the temple of Asclepius in this area. So Josephus in the 1st century is calling this the Serpent's Pool. So it's not something that's built subsequently by the Romans in the next century, but rather in the same century as Jesus. So the question would be, would Jesus go to this place to heal somebody? Would the Jews hang out around this pool to go into the pool to be healed? Because the tradition was when an angel came down and disturbed the waters, the first one in got healed. That's the tradition. So would Jesus hang out there, and would these Jews hang out there to be healed? And I say no, they would not. So what's interesting is we have 3 or 4 different testimonies from ancient history that the pool was actually here. We've already mentioned Theodosius. Theodosius says 100 paces from Pilate's house is Caiaphas's house, the high priest. And the other way, he says, also 100 paces, same distance anyway, to the sheep pool. Now, this is way further than 100 paces, and so that's probably why somebody moved Pilate's house up here. But it's really here, and here's Caiaphas, and so here is the real sheep pool. We have a picture of that that shows what we discovered. We're looking this way in the picture towards this wall, this Turkish wall, and it's the remains of a very large building. According to the Aramaic version of the Bible, in John chapter 5, it says that there are 5 entrances to this pool. Elat Mazar says this pool was surrounded by a big building. So I have a suspicion that's exactly correct, and you can see in the picture the pool and some of that building right behind it. Also, Theodosius says that there was a church related to the pool. And if you look in the Turkish wall right here, we have a picture of the lintel that came from that very church. He called it St. Mary's, though, not St. Anne's. He says the church by the pool is St. Mary's. We found the lintel, and on this side, if you take a tour down here, you will see columns with crosses on them. Now, this later all becomes Turkish. they build their palace here, and they reuse the stones that they found, and so they use these columns. There's the columns with the crosses in it. So this is the Church of St. Mary's right by the pool. Now the Breviarius, which says, gives a kind of a little thumbnail sketch of Jerusalem, it also talks about below the pinnacle of the temple was a pool where people washed and were healed. So they say the same thing. Along comes a pilgrim many years later, Theodoric. Theodoric says, he comes into the temple on the west side, and he says you can turn up this way and look at the Templum Domini, so the house of God, the temple of God up here. And if you turn the other way, he says you can find a pool where the sacrifices were washed. And he says there's so many steps down, about 29 steps, if I recall. And so we've looked all over the Temple Mount for these steps that he's talking about. What's interesting, though, is in the late 20th century, all of this was cleared away, and they found the steps he was talking about. But I'm not sure everybody realizes that. But the steps are down this side, down here, and there is the pool right where he said it was. So the looking up here was entirely wrong. He meant outside, down here at the sheep pool. So we have several witnesses from the past that talk about it. The Bordeaux pilgrim saw a pool here. Theodosius saw a pool here. The Breviarius mentions the pool, and Theodoric mentions the pool down here. So we have a picture of those things. Therefore, and the point of this is that if the sheep pool is here, then the sheep gate is close by. This was pointed out by Jewish archaeologists that said, well, if this is the sheep pool, then the sheep gate must be nearby. But it's not the sheep pool. The sheep pool is down here, so the sheep gate is close by. And what does that mean? What that means is Nehemiah travels around the city, and he dedicates the walls of the city and stops at the temple, and the sheep gate is south of the Temple Mount. So here is where the pool is, and somewhere in this area would be where Nehemiah's sheep gate would be. So that's important as we go on to look at this. So here's a sidebar, another sidebar, not just the sheep pool, but also another sidebar that talks about the southern portion of, southern portion of the city that we also have a picture of that shows this section and the things we've discovered about this southern section of the city. What we know is down here, Bliss and Dickey, who did all these excavations, they worked for the Palestine Exploration Fund. They came here in the late 1890s to dig up the walls. It was a big controversy at the time, and they're trying to show where the walls were. Now, they know nothing about Nehemiah here at all. They're just finding walls, and we're so glad they did. The red is what they did, and this wall here goes all the way down to the southern tip of the city of David, and they found a gate down there. And they've been credited for finding the ancient dung gate, not the dung gate up on the Turkish wall, but the ancient one down by the city of David. So Nehemiah describes a distance from the dung gate up here to the valley gate of, he says, 1,000 cubits. Now this is actually, 1,000 cubits is 1,500 feet. This is actually more like 1,700 feet, and so people have rejected this idea, but I don't think Nehemiah was saying that they had to repair the whole wall. They just repaired 1,000 cubits, or 1,500 feet. So this matches, the dung gate's down here, and then it comes up to this gate. This gate is here, and it faces a valley. Nehemiah talks about the valley gate. 2 Chronicles 26 talks about a tower that was put right next to the gate to reinforce it by King Uzziah. So I think we're on the right road here, but we have a lot of other indicators that this is the correct place where Nehemiah started his choirs to circle the city, up to the sheep gate on this side, and up to the water gate on the other side. So here we have the valley gate. Then we have a scarp that runs like this, and it makes kind of a corner here. And 2 Chronicles 26 talks about the corner tower next to the corner gate. So it's a nice corner here. In fact, the Palestine Exploration Fund called it the corner gate, the corner tower, with a small c. But it's actually exactly what Nehemiah, or rather 2 Chronicles talks about. So Nehemiah and Chronicles talk about the valley gate and the tower. Only the Second Chronicles talks about this, but Second Chronicles adds in chapter 25 that there was a section of wall that was torn down by the northern kingdom of Israel. 600 feet they tore down, or 400 cubits. They tore it down from the gate of Ephraim down to the corner gate. So it just so happens on Bliss and Dickey's map that this is 600 feet. We went there in 2017, my daughter and I, and we went to discover these points, and we were able to find this one, we were able to find this one, and actually got into the rabbi's compound, took a picture of it, which we can show you right now, of the gate of Ephraim. Now notice this is on a strange angle right here. It's kind of a funny angle for a wall. And when Chronicles talks about this, they say Uzziah reinforced the valley gate, he reinforced the corner gate with a tower, and he put a tower next to the angle in the wall. Now the question is, why did they say angle in the wall? Why didn't they say he put a tower next to the gate of Ephraim? And the reason is this: Ephraim is another name for Israel. The northern king of Israel came down, fought the southern king of Judah. Judah lost. The king brought him down as a hostage, came into the city, tore down all of this, ruined all of this, and the next king of Judah had to fix it. But he doesn't want to call this gate the gate after his enemy. It used to be that name. He changes it. He says, we put a tower here at the angle in the wall. So everything seems to fit. Down here, Bliss and Dickey found a tower, a very thick walled tower that's not on any wall of the city. Now Nehemiah talks about a tower of the ovens when he describes this area. So one of his choirs is going to come up around this way in a clockwise fashion. The other choir is going to go in a counterclockwise fashion. When this choir goes this way, it goes above the Tower of the Ovens. The Tower of the Ovens is actually down the hill from where we found the gate of Ephraim. When we talked to the rabbi about this, he says, that's exactly right. He says, I understand everything you're saying. And he agreed with us, and he's going to start an archaeological dig, which we hope to help support. Down here, this Tower of the Ovens, you might ask the question, why would you put a tower on a wall? And of course, we don't find it on a wall. But what is it a Tower of the Ovens for? A lot of people speculate the Tower of the Ovens was to bake bread. Maybe. But I think he really was talking about a Tower of the Ovens that baked tile, and that they baked the tile for the floor of the platform of the real temple. And so that's why Nehemiah repairs it. And the reason I say tile is there is a little room right here that they found just above that with 10 different diagrams, 10 different squares of what they could make at this tower. And their decorations and their different colors, and they seem to match the colors of what they might put on the temple floor. So this tower was for baking tile. We have a picture of both of those, and this tower is actually hidden now by a mausoleum. All of this is in Oskar Schindler's cemetery. Oskar Schindler was buried right about here, and we have a picture that shoots back up towards the mausoleum, and that's where the tower would be. We are certain of that. I would like my Catholic friends to consider, this is a Catholic cemetery, and Oskar Schindler was Catholic, and so I would like my friends to consider helping us dig here and look for what's left of that tower, because I'm certain this is from Nehemiah's time. Bliss and Dickey didn't know it. Seems like nobody's known this until now. So the cemetery was built without any regard to archaeology. But that's where we would like to dig. We're going to dig here, God willing, and dig here, God willing, to show the connection. And these are the walls. So the choir comes up around this way. There's one problem. Nehemiah says that they went by the broad wall. There is a broad wall that was found. Hopefully I can show you on this map without too much glare. A broad wall was found up here on this map, far north of where we're talking about. So everybody says, well, that's the broad wall of Nehemiah. And that is not the case. The Palestine Exploration Fund in the 19th century also came to the rescue, and they said, oh, broad wall might just mean wall of the broad. And it's translated that in the Greek Old Testament from 200 BC. the wall of the broad, meaning wall of the courtyard. And Nehemiah talks about that courtyard being a celebration place for the Feast of Tabernacles, or if you prefer the Feast of Booths or the Feast of Sukkot, that there was a broad area either on this side or this side, I'm not real sure. There is a pavement, Bliss-and-Dickey found over here, so it's possible it's on this side, but there's a very broad area up here where they could have set up their tents and their makeshift tabernacles on this plaza up here. So when he says his choirs go by the broad wall or the wall of the broad, I think this is what he's talking about. So that solves one of the dilemmas of saying this is where the choir started. Almost everybody else goes up to the northern Jaffa Gate to start Nehemiah's choirs. And that really can't be true, but for one reason, they go too short around to the temple, the traditional temple this way, and 2 times as far around this way. So it's not a central location. This, however, and we have a picture of this, this is almost exactly the same distance. If the choir this way goes clockwise and the other choir goes counterclockwise, the distances are the same. They arrive at the temple about the same time. So, we also have something else that goes on when we talk about starting the choirs down here. Nehemiah says he puts the leaders of Judah on both choirs, and so they lead around the walls down here. Now that's interesting. The leaders of Judah do it, not the leaders of Benjamin and Judah, but just Judah alone. That's interesting. It's a small point, but it's probably a great point. One of the reasons this is so interesting is because Benjamin and Judah both owned the city. We know that from the book of Joshua, the book of Judges, and also from Nehemiah. However, this is a little controversial, but bear with me. Most people say the border ran south of the city between Benjamin to the north and Judah to the south. But that really can't be true if they both owned the city, if they both lived in the city in those 3 different books of the Bible. So I have a proposition that will change things. People say that the valley of the Hinnom runs down here. But I think the valley of Hinnom ran this way. And I'm not going to do the research for you. I'm going to let you do it. My wife said, throw a little humor in. Okay, here's my humor. You find out where the Jews destroyed all their idols. Okay, you find it. Go find it in the Bible. You will find. I'll tell you what you will find, but you can research it. Every time they destroy idols is in this valley right here, not down here like everybody says. Solomon built his pagan wives some temples on the other side of this valley here, and that's where they were destroyed, finally. Every time there's something going wrong here, they throw the idols down in this valley and destroy them here. So, what's interesting is, the Mishnah says that the border between Benjamin and Judah actually cuts through the temple area. Now, if you follow this up this way, you will see, and we have a picture of this border, it cuts backwards straight through the temple area and slices off the southeast corner of the altar. What I read in some of the Gemara, and which is associated with the Mishnah, is that when they laid the altar of the Jews, poured the altar, they actually had a board that cut off that southeast corner so that the altar could not be said to be in Judah's territory. They went to great lengths to make sure. So that angle would come up north and then slice down like that across the temple, across the altar, and then go on up. Now, if you do that, it solves several other problems. One of the problems is Josephus said that, and the Mishnah says, and Maimonides says, that there is a hollow portion to the temple platform, and these contour lines kind of show it right here. The valley comes down like this and then cuts into the southwest and then continues south from there. If you run your border up like this, right along this hill, and cut backwards through the temple, that leaves this whole area hanging over the valley. And so, it's true, just like the Mishnah said, the portion of Judah is hollow underneath, but the temple and the altar are on solid ground. So if you do that, that makes sense. Up here, it doesn't work like that. Up here, this is a very gentle slope either way. Under the Temple Mount, there's no such thing as a cliff. Josephus says there was a cliff here right in front of the altar, that Solomon had a hard time with that, not enough room, so he actually planted his wall deep into the Kidron Valley and built up the platform and made ground. So that matches the Mishnah. It matches the hollow portion that belonged to Judah. It matches the Gemara's point that says the altar was sliced off in its southeast corner. And so all of this matches. And if you put the south wall of the temple here, that is the highest wall. Josephus says the south wall of the temple was the highest wall. It was dizzyingly high, he said. You could hardly see the bottom. But if you go up here, that's not true of this wall at all. This is the south wall of the traditional Temple Mount. And so it doesn't work like that there. But it does work here, and it does make the hollow space, and it does leave a little place here for Solomon to place his temple and then his altar, and it explains the border cutting right across the southeast corner of the altar. Okay, we also find the upper gate of the temple right here, and that's important because the upper gate faces north. The upper gate is also not just a gate for the temple, but it's also a gate for the palace. Everybody knows the palace of Solomon was here. They found subsequent kings had their palaces here, and they found a royal seal from King Hezekiah in this area. So the upper gate of the temple would face north. It also is contiguous with the palace. So you can't do that up here. The palace is not up here. You can't go north and have the upper gate here. There's no palace, but the palace is here. The upper gate is here, and it faces into and is contiguous with the palace itself. Now, why is it called upper? Why is it the upper gate? Well, if you go to the city of David, visit Jerusalem, go to the old city, and you'll find that this is a very steep hill that descends to the south. The upper side of it would be here, and that explains why it's called the upper gate. When Nehemiah sends his choir this way, with Judah being the leader, they stay in Judah's territory, exactly like we said. Except that when they get to the sheep gate, it doesn't say he stopped at the sheep gate, but it says they went as far as the sheep gate and then cut across to the gate of the guards, which is another name for the upper gate. So we have the sheep gate here, which we've established south of the Temple Mount, and they cut across here, which leaves out part of the wall that they don't dedicate. That's exactly what Nehemiah said. They didn't do it. They didn't actually dedicate this whole wall. What they did was they came up, they came as far as the sheep gate, they moved to the upper gate, and then entered the temple. All of this is south of the Temple Mount. The other choir came around like this, down to the ancient dung gate. The modern dung gate is here, but the ancient dung gate is here. This is the 1,700 feet, 1,000 cubits, 1,500 feet of the cubits there. They come up around this way, and they pass the tombs of David. Now it's tombs plural in the Hebrew. Unfortunately, up here is where the casket of David is, on the cenaculum, and people go there and they worship and they pray and so on there at the tomb of David. That's also the building that houses on the upper floor, the upper room where the disciples had their last meal with Jesus. However, of course, that's all Crusader nonsense, and that's not where the Last Supper was, but that's where people put where David was buried, but Nehemiah puts it here. And so who are we going to believe? Are we going to believe Nehemiah, or are we going to believe somebody else that puts the tomb up here? He says tombs. So back in the day, about 100 years ago, there was a man named Raymond Weil. Raymond Weil is a Frenchman. He's a Jewish archaeologist. He was hired by the Rothschilds to go down and dig in this area and see what he could find. So he got out his copy of the Word of God. He turned to the book of Nehemiah. He follows the points Nehemiah talks about, and he hits the tombs of David right here. There are two parallel side-by-side tombs. You can see them. Unfortunately, most people don't. The reason is, most people go here. This is the Gihon Spring, and then they travel through the tunnel that Hezekiah dug all the way down to the pool of Siloam. It's a lot of fun. You get your feet wet. It's nice and cool and refreshing. Everybody does it. It's sort of a pilgrim thing to do. Everybody gets in his tunnel and follows it down, and everybody's amazed and everybody's refreshed, and that's the end of the tour. But in 2015, I thought I would take the dry tour. I went down to Hezekiah's tunnel and then came out into the Kidron Valley, and you walk around the side of the mountain, and we had a tour guide with us that time. She didn't want to get her feet wet, so she came with us on the dry part of the tour. We walked right by Raymond Wheel's tombs that he found 100 years before, and she said nothing. We walked by it, I noted it, I didn't think anything of it, and I kept going. Later, when I got back to the States, I found that those were considered the tombs of David, plural, tombs, plural. And so Nehemiah takes you up this way, says the tombs of David are there. He comes up to the water gate, which is above the Gihon Spring, and the choir stops. The choir stops way down here. The other choir stops up here, so we have the parameters of the temple right here, and that's where the temple was. Nehemiah, when he describes the repairs on the walls, he comes up around this way and he gets as far as the water gate. Then he says people from the Ophel, which is here, come down to help out build part of this wall. So they skip the great projecting tower. The great projecting tower seems to me that it's projecting out over the valley. Exactly what the Mishnah said, exactly what Josephus said, exactly what Nehemiah said. And when the choirs dedicate, they come around and they stop right there at the water gate, and they enter the temple. The temple's not up here, according to Nehemiah. It's down here. So we can see this in his order. He talks about the water gate. Next, he talks about the great projecting tower, which Benjamin Mazar, the famous archaeologist in Israel, said, I don't know what this is. His daughter speculated that it might be the temple, and then she took it back right away. And then comes the Ophel wall, which is north of that. And so we have the great projecting tower is the temple, and it's south of the traditional Temple Mount. Now, we do have a problem with this. The problem is there is one little bit of evidence that the Temple Mount might be the right place, and I'll have to put this one back up. Hopefully it's not too confusing. We come back up here to the corner of what I call the Roman fort, and right down here tourists can see a cornice stone which says in Hebrew, to the place of trumpeting, so, or to the house of trumpeting. And it's right here on the corner, and Benjamin Mazar says, see, there you go, this is the temple, this is what Josephus talked about. Frankly, when I heard that, and heard that from my pastor and saw that in a book, I was devastated. I thought, all this research for nothing. There's proof that that's where the temple was. Benjamin Mazar goes on to say this is identical to what Josephus says. So I get out my Josephus, kind of sad, but I looked it up. And it turns out that he actually says, now let's pretend, or just for the sake of argument, say this is the Temple Mount. He says the rebels who were fighting each other before the Romans came built a tower in this corner here, the northeast corner. They built a tower here. They built a tower in the southwest corner. And they built a tower just to the north of the temple in the Pastaphoria. The Pastaphoria being a chamber of the temple for the priests. And many times in the Old Testament, Greek Old Testament, it's used of the treasury of the temple, which we know was on the north side of the temple. And he says that's the fourth tower, and that's where they blew the shofar. So it's not here at all, according to the eyewitness priest, first century priest of Jerusalem, who actually was a resident of Jerusalem. He didn't say they blew it here on the corner. He said they blew it up here, if for argument's sake we can say this is the Temple Mount. What I think happened was, it was down here, the temple was destroyed, the city's going to be destroyed, the temple's burning, they have a cornerstone and they drag it up here as a triumph and they leave it here. Now, right now it's displayed on the actual corner, southwest corner of the Temple Mount, but it wasn't really found there, which is a little bit, I wish they hadn't done that. because it wasn't exactly found there. It was moved, it was from up the hill a little bit, up the steps. It might have been close, but it still was moved. So now it looks more like, well, that's where the temple is, but it was moved. Romans always make triumphs at a great battle. That's where they set up a monument where and there was a great battle between the fort and the temple that went back and forth. This would make a wonderful movie. I always tell kids in my school, if you're interested in film, make a movie about the destruction of Jerusalem and the war between the Jews and the Romans. But anyway, there's a huge struggle that's described between these two, and right there is their monument to that struggle. The God of the Jews, being a God of the Sabbath, says worship on the Sabbath. They blow the shofar on the Sabbath, and so they say, aha, here's our triumph. We beat the God of the Jews. But just know that Josephus does not put this as the place where the shofar was blown. If this is the Temple Mount, it was blown way up here. So either way, the stone was moved away from its original location. Okay, so I was glad to see Josephus did not actually support what they said. Okay, so we have a little summary of what we've talked about already. We've noted that the stones around here are not big enough to be the Temple Mount. One stone is 18 feet shy of the 60 feet. By the way, 60 feet sounds enormous, but the Temple of Baalbek, Jupiter's temple that was built up north of Jerusalem, up in Lebanon or Syria, had 100-foot stones. So this is not impossible to do, and so this is wrong about the Temple Mount. The stone under the dome is not the right place because it's 5 feet off the platform, not 3 fingers. We have a high tower here. We have a secret tunnel here. We have the 2 gangways here that Josephus talks about, that everybody still knows are there. It's not a secret. We actually have steps here. The steps are mentioned in the New Testament where Paul is dragged up the stairs by the Roman guards, and he asked permission to address the crowds below. So he's up on the top of these stairs. We have a sheep pool down here, not up here. We have the house of Caiaphas over here, the sheep pool here, Pilate's house here, from good testimony. We have down here the Acra that overlooks the temple and is abutted right next to the temple. We have the cistern above that with Acra written on the side of it, showing that it was the water source for this fort right here. We have the high wall down here. Josephus describes the south wall being the highest. We have the hollow portion of the temple being Judah's, according to the Mishnah. We have a little space for the temple and the altar. The altar sliced off by the border coming this way. We have the starting points for Nehemiah. The choir coming up this way, the choir coming this way. This one stops at the sheep gate, crosses to the upper gate. This one comes up and around and stops at the water gate. And so we have defined by the colonnades and the gangways and the Acra and Nehemiah, we have decided the temple has to be in this location. Now, we also have to just go back and make sure that this is truly the gate of Ephraim. Maybe we have to go and find out if this is truly the Tower of the Ovens. But once you start playing around with this and not believing Nehemiah that the tombs of David are here and ignoring the Word of God, then everything is off. All bets are off. Everything. I've seen maps of people starting things all over the place. But if you start with these points of reference, which are good points of reference, you will always come back to the final conclusion that the water gate above the Gihon leads to the great projecting tower, which is south of the Ophel. The Ophel is south of the Temple Mount, so therefore the great projecting tower of Nehemiah is the temple itself. Now, detractors from my view have pointed out certain things, but they have never been able to say that Nehemiah's map was wrong, that the map of the southern part is wrong down here. They have said, yeah, you're onto something. I've got PhDs, I've got archaeologists, I've got lots of people looking at this saying that's exactly right. But if this is right, if this is where Nehemiah started his choirs, then we absolutely know that the Temple Mount is not the right place. And so I hope in the future to make another video to show you what we've done and to announce the start of our foundation where we can send the money, where we can help out the archaeologist that's volunteered to dig here. We're hoping for funds in the future, but for now, this is a good introduction. We'll see how this introduction does on the internet. Thank you for your time. God bless.